perhaps give us a little thumbnail sketch of you, how long you've been with the company, and your journey, please.
Yeah, well, I'm the new boy. I've only been the MD for 3.5 years, so I'm only a very, very small part of Lock's history. But I joined October 2016, and I didn't have any hat background. I've always been in retail and looked after other businesses, but there's just something magic about Locks, and you feel it when you've been to the store, I think, Pete.
Yes.
But when you open that brass door handle on the original door, and the shop has barely changed from the early 1700s, and it's the feel of it, the look of it, dare I say, the smell of it, the slight sort of creaky floorboards, slightly dusty. It just feels very magic. It feels like stepping back in time, and we're very fortunate where we are in St James's Street to be almost like a little oasis in London, because just north of us is Piccadilly. Then you've got some of the busier places in London towards like Haymarket and Leicester Square, but actually St James's Street is relatively quiet, and obviously in the shop you could really be in any time in the world other than the electric lights and air conditioning now. So
And so everything is A-listed, I'm guessing. And by A-listed, I don't know if this really transmutes over to Americans or international audience, but basically everything, if you wanted to change a sign or a glass pane, you'd need to apply to like a council grant.
yeah, under historic England, the building's protected and listed, so we can't materially change anything, and we wouldn't really. I mean, it was not really built to be a shop. Originally, in the early 1600s, it was a pub, then a coffee shop. We were originally on the other side of the road, and we moved to the shop as it is now. We've always been in St James's Street since 1676, about 100 years before independent America, to give it a sort of a time frame reference, 10 years after the Great Fire of London. And then in 1759, we moved into the business where we are now and took over from the coffee shop. And the grandfather clock from there is still in the shop from 1723. So.
That's fantastic. And are the families still involved at all? Is it family owned? How's that work?
Yeah, it's still family owned. There's two families that own it. You have the Lock McDonalds and the Stevensons. So we're one of the oldest family businesses. I think someone worked out we're the 34th oldest family business in the world. I'm not quite sure how they got to that, but we'll run with that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Moving on to James Bond, really, Ben. Do you have a personal favorite Bond, and a personal favorite film?
Yeah, do you know what? I actually really like the new films. I really like the Daniel Craig films. I kind of like it, taking it back to a slightly rawer, a rawer Bond. I love Sean Connery. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't like Connery as a Bond, and maybe I'm in the minority, but I really like Timothy Dalton as well. I love The Living Daylights. Was sort of when I was the right age as a boy. The Living Daylights was the sort of the new film then, and watching the Aston Martin and the skis and the and everything else was just pure magic. So I've always loved it growing up, and I always make sure I go and see the new films when they come out.
And as managing director, are you hands-on? Are you on the shop floor, or are you more background?
Yeah, a little bit of both, actually. I mean, there is quite a bit of planning and office work, and it's quite a busy shop, actually. It's for a little hat shop, we get a lot of foreign visitors, we get a lot of press and film work and things like that. But I actually, my favourite time is when I can park that a little bit and come downstairs and meet and greet and hopefully serve. I'm sure my team will tell you that I'm not the best at it, but I give it a good shot.
Well, that kind of leads me on to the question of how many people come in and ask for James Bond hats or James Bond affiliated stuff.
Yeah, very often, actually. Very often. There's a lot of interest in Bond and the films in general, but more so Bond, I would say. I think in the summer we get a lot of the foreign tourists and visitors who are just thrilled to see the shop, and we tend to, I mean, you probably get a question a day, if not every other day, about Bond or Kingsman or something like that.
Right. And then do you kind of have to take a beat, kind of go, oh, here we go, or do you go, oh, great, I can't wait to talk about Bond?
Do you know what? I love talking about it.
Excellent.
We enjoy it. I think it's a real perk, actually, for everyone that works in the shop, because we've got people that have been there for 20 plus years. and longer, and then we've got people that joined us in the last sort of 6 months or so. And I would say the enthusiasm hasn't diluted any from the new guys to the old guys, or it's...
And do you like perhaps shirt makers and tailors have an archive as well, so you can perhaps trace some of these transactions?
Yeah, so we have our ledgers. So we have the wonderful leather-bound ledgers. It's all a bit different now with digital till points and things like that. But yeah, we have our ledgers. So we have records of orders, purchases, who came into the store, and then for some of the sort of more notable customers, we retain the head shapes, so we can see, obviously if they had a custom fitting. So yeah, we're pretty good at finding them. It's a little bit of a labyrinth going through the ledgers, because you can imagine there's hundreds of names and it's not necessarily alphabetical. So you have to have a good sort of steer as to when it was in terms of like month and year. But yeah, it's all documented there.
And would Fleming have been in those?
Yeah, Fleming. I think Fleming's probably our earliest connection to Bond. So Fleming was a customer,
Right.
and of course he was his sort of one of his favourite haunts was the Duke's Hotel, which is opposite us. And there's a picture of him in the Duke's bar, enjoying a drink, and the Dukes will tell you that he actually sort of sketched out some of the stories in the Duke's bar. So there's a nice connection to Ian Fleming and Locks, but also the St James's area. So.
Right. Okay. So when I was in Lock and Co, I did see a lot of these. Sorry, how do you call it? So there's ledgers, but they're blueprints on the wall, the actual mappings,
so
and
you've got
they're
the
done to ratios, aren't they? So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so you've got the ledgers, which are the leather-bound books which record the sale and the orders and measurements. So you would have in the heritage room where we keep some of the London Metropolitan Archive actually store our ledgers and look after them for us, but we have some on site for people to see. So these are these lovely leather-bound books that you see sort of open in there. And currently we've got Nelson's ledger with the bicorn. We've got Churchill's ledger and the Queen's ledger in there at the moment. But then on the wall, yeah, you're right, you've got those head shapes, which are, imagine almost like a bird's eye view down the top of your head. And it's a 1/6 scale, which takes the shape. Because and what that serves to do is you and I could have exactly the same measurement in terms of our size, but we could have a very different shape. And for some of the hats, unlike the Sandown, which is a softer hat and would mould, and you and I, it would be fine to fit, the top hat, the bowler hat, for example, they're very, very firm, very stiff. And the chances of you and I having the same size that fits would be very remote.
right. And what would happen? So I would come back into the shop after making my first purchase, and you would have these to hand, so that you can go, oh,
Yeah.
excellent, we have your measurements, we can just do this again.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we can take a size or we take a head shape if you're. We call it conformed. It sounds dreadfully sinister, but it's, when you have because the machine that we use is from the 1850s, made in France. We still use that.
And what's the name of that machine? So,
It's called the conformator,
that's it. Yeah.
and it looks like a torture instrument. If you're not familiar with it, it's sort of it looks like something you would really punish someone with, and it has various sort of spikes and pins pointing out of it. But it's quite a nice experience. It feels a little bit like those sort of new head massages that people use. So it's not too bad at all.
And is there just one of those? I mean, what happens if that kind of breaks a valve, or what?
Well,
how often does it need to be maintained?
Yeah, well, we have 6 for that reason. So we try and we have 2 that we mainly use, and then we have 4 that effectively serve as sort of spares.
Right.
For those to function. I mean, all 6 work, but 2 are better than others because obviously they've had a lot of use over the years.
Interesting.
So yeah, but we still do it the traditional way.
I'm curious to know, outside of Dr. No and From Russia with Love, what other hats may have been featured in the Bond films over the years. Do we know if Goldfinger, for example, Odd Job's famous steel-rimmed hat, was there a connection there?
Yeah, so we made the hat for Odd Job in Goldfinger. That's a custom hat, and people think that it's commonly known as a bowler, what we call a cook hat, but it's actually a Cambridge, very similar to the style that Churchill wore, which is a sort of you almost say like a low rounded crown top hat or a squared off bowler hat. It's sort of in between. But that's actually called the Cambridge, and yeah, that was custom made by Locks for the film.
Wow. And how practical or realistic is it to launch that thing with that level of accuracy, would you say?
Well, ours don't have steel in. We don't have blades in ours. But it's pretty heavy. It's pretty solid. It's a very, very firm hat. So yeah, I think, if someone had aggrieved you enough, I think you could probably launch it with a fair degree of accuracy.
And do we know if Lock & Co have done any hats for Lazenby and for more? Now, I'm going to preload this with you because I believe there was a hat that Roger Moore wore as Sherlock Holmes.
That's right.
So did he wear any as Bond as well? And did Lazenby wear any?
No, we're not aware. I mean, it's difficult for us sometimes to say because sometimes the purchases are anonymous by film crews or film units. So it's difficult to say. I think there's been suspicion that some hats are, but we would never like to say for definite unless we absolutely knew. I mean, there was another hat in Goldfinger which Sean Connery wore at the golf course, the Stoke Park golf course, which we actually remade off the same block recently called the Palm Springs. Lovely black straw hat, and that sold in record time.
Didn't you have to change the name because it was just too obvious? And then
well, we did it as a limited run, and so originally we were going to call it the Stoke Park, and then it just it just sort of flew. So we've actually changed the name now to Palm Springs, but it's a different band, it's a different ribbon, but you can clearly see it's the same hat. So.
Is that still available, Ben?
There are some.
There are some still available. Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to run it again actually for next summer. Yeah.
Interesting. And do you think Bond? I think you might have a little bit of confirmation bias, and so will I, because I'm an avid hat wearer. But do you think Bond of now, like Daniel Craig, could be wearing Lock & Co hats, perhaps like Connery would do in the 60s?
I'd love to think so, because I think they are. I mean, there's certainly, it's on an upward trend. There's no question of that. And actually, thanks in part to very good tailoring, reappearing in very cool films. So again, Kingsman and the Bond films. The only hat that we know for sure that Daniel Craig has worn is in Spectre, which is the ski cap, the cashmere ski cap, which is a beautiful hat, but not the sort of traditional style. And then we in View to Kill and License to Kill, you have Roger Moore in the grey Ascot hat, so the grey top hat. And Desmond Llewellyn and Patrick Macnee as well, but
right.
More famously Roger Moore and then Timothy Dalton. So.
Nice. And what happens to these hats afterwards? Do they go up, we'll give them back to you, or we'll put these in the museum?
Yeah, normally they're retained by the film unit because they quite often find themselves in museums. I think we've had one of them end up in Planet Hollywood, and I think a couple of them are auctioned off. I think certainly the one that was shot through in License to Kill is I think was signed and auctioned off. Right. But we occasionally get them back from film units. Most of the time they're retained.
And just recently, the Goldfinger hat got sold on Bargain Hunt, was it? Or crikey, I forget the names. It's not Bargain Hunt.
Yeah, one of those.
Sorry, yeah. Some auction, televised auction.
Like Antiques Roadshow or
Thank
something.
you.
Thank you.
I mean, that must have been a real coup for you guys. Did you get any involvement at all? Did you manage to have a look at it before it went under the hammer there? Or?
No, we didn't, and we would have liked to actually. It would have been nice to see it, and obviously do maybe some people want them restored or sort of retrimmed or polished or whatever. Occasionally, again, because the area when we've got Christie's, the auction house around the corner from us. So occasionally we'll hear from Christie's that there's a Lock & Co hat from a celebrity or part of an auction where we'll get to appraise it and value it and those sort of things. Yeah.
Awesome.